pimps, power, and pretty ladies. This is Blax History Month, a 28-day celebration of black exploitation films. I know I'm not the only one who's often thought to myself, I wonder what teenage life was like for my parents. As we get older, we tend to develop a glamorized view of our childhood and typically leave off all the unsavory parts. But we all know, everything wasn't perfect. I bet if you ask most older people though, they would probably say that the movie Cooley High is the best representation of teenage life back then. If you went to high school in the 60s, that is. Cooley High represents a bit of a turning point for blaxploitation movies, and black cinema as a whole. The stories in these movies at the time were rarely if ever told from the perspective of the kids. In fact, out of all the movies I've done so far, there's only been kids in 2 of them. These movies are about exaggerated portrayals of adult fantasies, and don't really leave enough room for harsh realities. That's where Cooley High steps in. Written by Eric Monte and directed by Michael Schultz, Cooley High was intended to be a coming-of-age story about having aspirations in life despite growing up in the projects. Writer Eric Monte said that whenever a story takes place in a project, it's always bleak and hopeless. He wanted to show that not everybody who grows up in a housing project lives a sad and depressing life, and that a lot of kids have big dreams of the future. Cooley High stars Glenn Turman as Leroy Preach Jackson and Lawrence Hilton-Jacobs as Richard Cochise Morris. Although if you're like me, Lawrence Hilton-Jacobs will forever be Joe Jackson. They attend Edwin G. Cooley High School, which was an actual high school at the time in Chicago. Preach and Cochise have big aspirations, with the Preach wanting to be a writer and Cochise getting a scholarship to play basketball. But they barely go to class and spend all day getting into trouble with their friends. That's what makes Cooley High so good. It's a realistic portrayal of normal teenage life in the hood, and not some made-for-TV wholesome view where everything is perfect. Preach and Cochise deal with all the same issues that all young people deal with, no matter the generation. They lie about stuff to try to impress their friends.
This reminds me of the time, Jack. I used to drive this Maserati for this rich whitey over on the Gold Coast.
They're always trying to get in some draws. They succumb to peer pressure constantly, and they're terrified of getting caught by authority figures. The movie starts out as just fun and games, until Preach and Cochise are pressured into getting into a stolen car by 2 gang members. Once inside, they do what teens would do in a situation like that, and most of the scene was ad-libbed with those same instructions. I think it's this authenticity that makes this movie so timeless and enduring. Speaking of authenticity, director Michael Schultz went out of his way to make this movie as realistic as possible by casting actual gang members as the 2 bad guys in the movie. That could have gone left real fast, but thankfully, sometimes people just want their story to get seen and will cooperate to make that happen. It worked out great because had I not known, I would have assumed those guys were really great actors. However, there was no acting needed in this case. That goes for most of the cast. Even though some had some stage experience, most of them were first-time actors and were hired because of their age and told to just be themselves for the most part. Be on the lookout for Robert Townsend in his first movie role. He even got to speak a line.
Somebody ought to kick y'all ass.
Garrett Morris, that most people know as Stan from Martin, is also in it as a no-nonsense teacher. To say that Cooley High is a major influence is an understatement. Directors such as Spike Lee and John Singleton point to it as inspirations for their careers, and some movies can easily be pointed out as being directly influenced by it, like Juice and Boys in the Hood. Remember that music video for the Fuji song Killing Me Softly? Well, that entire music video was ripped directly from a scene from Cooley High. The music group Boyz II Men named their first studio album Cooley High Harmony, and one of the biggest songs off that album was It's Hard to Say Goodbye, which is a song featured in Cooley High. Speaking of the music, since this is basically a period piece, most of it is Motown music from the 60s, and I think this is one of the only blaxploitation films that didn't have an original score, and instead used time period appropriate music. I could say a lot about Cooley High, but it's better if you just watch it. It's one of those movies that somehow takes you back to your younger years, even if you weren't alive in the time period that the movie takes place. And it can also take you through a wide range of emotions. Cooley High is not only one of the better blaxploitation films, but one of the better movies of the 70s.